Well, welcome everyone once again to We Are the Builders Australia, and also I have my fellow comrades and good friends, Nate Pano from Sydney and Helen Woolley from Melbourne. How are you two today?
Excellent, Dave. How are you? How are you, Helen?
Yeah, very good. Thanks.
Very good, thank you. Well, first of all, I'm broadcasting here from the Jar Jar Wurrung country, and I'd like to acknowledge the elders of the past, present, and future, and acknowledge that their struggle was first of all an anti-colonial struggle and independence of their nation. Today, it's now much included more into a broader struggle against imperialism, and it's vitally important that we are all united together now against our fight against imperialism and its successes as well, and to move forward in human history. So black and white unite to fight, and workers of all countries unite. So I'd like to also introduce tonight, or what we're going to be discussing tonight is actually we're going to be doing some reading on democracy and some discussion around that as well. It's a word that's been quite floated quite a lot, especially at this time and era. And we're talking about democratic rights, what are they, etc. But this is a good opportunity now. We can actually do some much more in-depth study and discussion. So, Helen, would you like to start off with some of the reading? Because I'm led to believe we're continuing on from the book We Are City Builders Educational Manual. You can always order that online, and after we studied chapter 1, and this is now moving from there to other forms of study.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. So we started Caleb Maupin's book looking at the city builders and vandals in our age, and we wanted to retouch on that and go back over a couple of paragraphs from that section, so that we could then introduce a discussion or introduce the platform from the organization that's won the elections in Peru, and the name of that is Peru Libre, and their ideological document tackles the whole question of democracy. So I'm just going to start off reading, recapping on what Caleb was saying at the beginning of City Builders and Vandals, and then we'll move on to the document from Peru Libre. So Caleb starts the book saying, throughout human history, two distinct trends have most certainly been present amongst us. There have always been city builders. They are the innovators, the scientists, philosophers, unifiers, heroes, poets, painters, architects, preachers, prophets, dreamers, and visionaries. They include the egalitarian solidarity builders, rationalists, the optimist, nonconformist, bright-eyed rebels, advocates for the downtrodden, inspirers and motivators. In essence, those individuals who push civilization towards a higher state of being. They are driven by an inner flame of creativity and boldness. These city builders have always stood in opposition to the efforts of the vandals. These are the raiders, the machine breakers, the hate mongers, the ignorant celebrators, jealousy peddlers, the demagogues, cultist, hedonist, self-destructive stoics. They are the wreckers, persecutors, lynch mob leaders, dope pushers, snake oil salesmen, sadists, the crucifiers, vulgar emotionalists, crass pornographers, bullies and bombers, who often worship darkness and primitivism. However, those two distinct trends, city builders and vandals, have existed since the dawn of human history and class society. From the very moment we began domesticating animals and growing crops, there were those who wanted to perfect our ability to do so and drive us towards a more advanced way of being. And from the moment of civilization's birth, there have been those who wanted us to regress back towards hunter-gatherer civilization and reduce ourselves to a lifestyle closer to that of the lower primates. The essence of this ongoing battle that has raged between civilizations and culture, within civilizations and cultures, and even within individuals themselves, has boiled down to this question. Will human beings utilize their gift of rationalism and creativity to progress towards greater achievements and a better world? Or will they reject the distinct essence of humanness and descend towards the conditions of less intelligent species? So then if we move on to looking at the birth of civilization, we can see that the Roman Empire developed the basis for democracy, and it wasn't obviously a complete democracy. It was a democracy that was based on class and hereditary elections. So the Roman Empire, the Roman Republic had a hereditary Senate. They elected representatives and elements of democracy for the simple reason that this was a better way of motivating its citizenry to plunder. A population that feels somehow involved in the business of governing and the distribution of loot is far more motivated to join wars of conquest than those who simply exist as subjects of an autocrat. However, the limited democratic procedures within the city-state empire proved to be too dangerous to the small elite of families who held actual power. And so what that's saying is that even though it was a very limited democracy, there was still within the ruling class, the small elite of families who held that actual power, they still felt that democracy was a threat. And so if we now want to look at the document from Peru Libre, it might be a good starting point to see where the democracy that we now have in Australia, and how is that different from the democracy that places like Peru, Venezuela, Cuba, the old Soviet Union, China, what is their democracy, and how is that better than the democracy that we have in our society?
Nate, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, no, well, I was actually prepared to answer the question because I was talking. But if you want to go ahead and answer that first, Dave, I'm happy to have you do that.
No worries. Oh, no, that was good. But yeah, no, if you have to have an answer, well, that calls it for the night then. Okay, everyone knows. Thanks, Nate. Well, what we'll do is we're talking about this. We're going to read chapter 2 out of this document. I don't know if people can see it, Peru Libre. And obviously they're talking about the background towards a new political constitution. So it's from the background, the current constitution, and I think in stone articles in the party, I think, and so on. So, and obviously that doesn't actually look like it goes too long. There's some very parts and very tiny writing, but we'll go through that. I think that's where we'll go advance forward. So, well, Nate, did you want to kick it off?
Yeah, sure. Where are we starting from?
Chapter 2. Have you got the document there?
Yeah, towards a new political constitution. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let's start. The political constitution of Peru of 1993 was imposed after a coup d'etat promoted by the national and transnational large business community, realizing the objectives of the Washington Consensus, which allowed them to adapt the state administration to their interests and establishing a new way of production to the country known as neoliberalism. Of course, the 1979 Constitution was not the expression of popular interest, but rather it was conservative, a defender of the business oligarchy, but it reserved a window for the state to safeguard some interests. After 27 years of existence, this neoliberal model demonstrated its inability to solve the needs of the majority classes in the country, reaching the extreme of not being able to cover the most basic needs that guarantee a decent life or the fundamental rights of Peruvian society. The current CPP promotes the individualistic, mercantilist, privatist, and surrender character. We say that it is individualistic because it does not promote solidarity as an indispensable social value at the national or international level, and on the contrary, it promotes the competence of each of its members, relegating the majority to the benefit of a few who achieve success after their effort as an expression of the class struggle. It is mercantilist because everything is based on two perverse laws, supply and demand, which has led to the fact that principles and values do not count in society, but rather the economic profitability that can be obtained as a result of any lawful or illegal act. It makes us a market society, but not a market society where man is reduced to being just a means of production or just another commodity. It is privatized because it has not only promoted, but has also materialized the privatization of all our state companies, which were owned by the Peruvian people, claiming their incompetence. A total of 228 state companies became private companies of the rulers themselves or their frontmen in collusion with a large national and foreign business community. It is indulgent because the main strategic mining, gas, oil, electricity, and hydro energy deposits are in the hands of large transnational capital. To this must be added the main ports, airports, highways, air corridors, amongst others. Named thus to the non-negotiable, immovable, and unchangeable clauses of neoliberalism embodied in the Magna Carta, we will name some more outstanding ones. So are we going through all that as well? Or? Yep.
Yeah, I think that's quite important.
In Article 6, the state outsources or privatizes its responsibility for health, education, and security to the parents and does not assume them as its own responsibility. Article 11 puts the choice of free access to public or private health, but does not guarantee the health of the people. Article 7 guarantees only initial, primary, and secondary education, but the higher education only guarantees it to those who obtain high academic performance, thus privatizing a fundamental right. Article 9 exempts private universities, institutes, colleges, and schools from all types of tax, thousands of them having proliferated without the academic quality, infrastructure, and human resources to guarantee quality education. Article 58 states that private initiative is free, with which we must infer that the public is not, and defines the state only as a body that promotes and guides. Article 59 grants freedom of business, commerce and industry, employment, finance, etc., that is, freedom only for the rich. Article 60 recognises the freedom of private and public companies, but restricts the latter unless authorised by express law. In other words, the public company is vetoed. Article 61 is the one that fights, but it does not prohibit monopoly, that is, it denatures its own conception of the free market. Thus, we have monopolies of the media, electricity, water, cement, etc. Article 62 prohibits the review of law contracts, even if they are harmful to the state. Claiming security, Article 59 grants freedom of business, commerce and industry, employment, finance, etc. That is, freedom only for the rich. Article 60 recognises the freedom of private and public companies, but restricts the latter unless authorised by express law. In other words, the public company is vetoed. Is this? I'm just realising here. Is this doubled on their article? I think it must be doubled up because we're back to Article 61 now. Yeah. I might just scan through and see where we can pick up, because I think they've accidentally doubled it here. You know what? It's all doubled all the way down. Sorry about that. I just realised that. But that is, it looks like a bit of a sort of setting error that they've had there. But we can continue if we like. Should we go on until the next section?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. So we followed on. These are basically all examples of the outstanding ones that they've referred to in the Magna Carta. So as we go on, we can say, they're going through legal and tax law. It also prohibits the Parliament from modifying it, which is why we have called it the cornerstone of neoliberalism. So the latter, Article 62, is the mother and protector of the country's largest looting and corruption for decades. The companies privatised were sold without prior consultation with the people at ridiculous prices and high commissions. According to the Investigative Commission of Economic and Financial Crimes 1990 to 2001, the product of these sales amounted to $7 billion and only $1 billion were invested in the country, $6 billion disappearing. And so that no one can reverse these sales, the current constitution, according to this article, prevents the revision, modification, cancellation, etc. of what they called law contracts. So then they move on to the Constituent Assembly and new constitution. So they say we need to promote and achieve a constitutional change that incorporates a diametrically opposite approach, that is, the struggle for a solidarity, humanistic, rescue and nationalising constitution. The new CPP must be drawn up by means of a Constituent Assembly which must conclude in the dismantling of neoliberalism and shape the new economic regime of the state. Popular economy with markets. They say these parameters have been taken from the governmental experience of the plurinational Republic of Bolivia and the Republic of Ecuador, of the Morales and Correa governments respectively. The first refers to the productive community economic social model, and the second to the citizen revolution model, which they make compatible with our objectives and which we will briefly call the popular economy with markets. So in regards to the regulatory state of the market, the change of the state regulated by the market by a state that regulates the market. It refers to a decentralized state, change from the centralist state that economically benefits the private initiative for a decentralized fiscal and tributary state, or the federal republic that benefits the public and private sectors. And they want a strong and empowered state, which is a change from the supervisory vigilant state to a state that is the controller, planner, innovator, entrepreneur, and protector. Yep. They want to have a wealth redistributing state, which is a change of the accumulating state that favors the transnational business community by attempting to improve wages by a redistributing state of wealth, favoring the national business community that improves wages. They want an industrializing state. So they want to change the primary exporting state that reduces jobs for an industrializing state, generating added value, investments, employment, and unfreezing of salaries in the country. They want a nationalizing state, a change of the privatizing and exporting state of capital for a sovereign nationalizing state that strengthens the internal economy by investing its capital in the country. They want to review status of contracts, change of the state that promotes impunity for concessions harmful to the people for a transparent state that allows their review, renegotiation, and cancellation. They want a state without external debt, a change of the state dependent on external indebtedness with fiscal deficit for a state that generates internal resources from the sovereignty of its resources with less external indebtedness and fiscal surplus. They want to prioritize the state of internal demand. So they want to change of the state that guides its economy by external demand for a state that guides its economy by internal demand without neglecting the external one. They want to, they refer to the microeconomic stabilizing state. So they want to change in the preference for macroeconomic stability for a state that prefers the microeconomic stability of the household without neglecting the macroeconomy. And above all, they want a sovereign state. So change of the state subject to the formulas of the Washington Consensus, the World Bank, International Monetary Fund, US Federal Reserve, US government, and substitutes for a sovereign state that with the Peruvian surplus, the economy of the country. So they go on to chapter 3. Are we going to get into that yet, or are we going to? Yep.
Oh, we will get into that in a minute. Yeah, and I think, look, some of the actually, this has been some really interesting stuff there. And I'm sorry I had to go on mute there too, everyone. I've just people were presenting messages. I didn't want to just interrupt the discussion now. What's interesting? I was looking at that, and I'm just looking at what's like here in Australia for us now, where it's an open neoliberal so-called free market, and they're talking about an export market, and that's what they've actually pretty much garnered Australia to be, an exporter in raw materials like raw resources. Iron ore is a classic example, coal, timber, but also agricultural products. But we also have very little manufacturing here, and I was thinking through this during this whole situation with COVID. What we found out, especially in the Union, what we found out just how exposed we are as an island continent nation, and so how import dependent we are on other countries, and especially under the guise of the US hegemony. And the fact is, where if we're so import dependent, that's actually a quite worrying trend, because now we're under the dictates of a foreign power, and that would be notably US foreign policy. Now, and I like how they've actually turned around. They want to, like how what Peru wants to do, turn around instead of being an export market. They want to turn back to grow this domestic market again, the domestic economy, and that means basically bringing back manufacturing and developing a strong manufacturing sector to be the keystone of a strong domestic economy, so they can control what's produced and control what's produced and not be up to the dictates of foreign capital. I think this is quite amazing. It's when I'm looking at what's popular economy with markets, what the current situation is, it's benefiting the very few. To what they want to do, which is going to benefit everybody else, and we get that because it's interesting how living under socialism, it basically there's so much material abundance that everyone is lifted up out of poverty and everyone's lives are improved. So it's quite a contrast to where here, where the governments are not interested in getting people out of poverty or anything. It's all about trying to keep the real big business going. and further and further. And COVID especially has exposed it. If anyone hasn't woken up to it, well, they need to, because this is what's really going on. So, you guys want to comment on that further?
Well, I was going to ask the question, and you've kind of answered it, Dave. But I was thinking about the very first chapter that we read, and it talked about being forced to work under a push to neoliberalism. And so my question was, has Australia been ordered to establish a new way of production in the country as part of the international push for neoliberalism? And I think you kind of answered that, Dave, when you were talking about, now that we've lost most of our manufacturing here in Australia, and we are just a resource-based country where the rape of the minerals and natural wealth has just been ramped up over the last 30, 40 years, and very little comes back into Australia in forms of taxes. And it's all taken overseas for the benefit of the export market, and I think it was a deliberate push to fit in with that framework of neoliberalism and multinational companies.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest similarities that I can see here so far is, when they refer to their mining and resources sector, that is something that, is a huge parallel with Australia. It's, even though we have vastly different material conditions between our two countries, it's something that it's a repeating theme that bears mentioning that neoliberalism produces in these two countries. Is that we have extraction of wealth and resources purely for the export market and purely for the export of capital. But and it's really good to see that they've identified that, and not only have they identified it, but they've actually put it in its appropriate context into neoliberalism, and trying to mitigate that. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and I think there's another question that I kind of thought about, and it's this whole question of privatization, which they tackle as well. So so they talk about it's privatized because it's not only promoted, but has also materialized the privatization of all our state companies, which were owned by the Peruvian people, claiming, and the claim was that they were incompetent, and that's how they managed to privatize it to companies, to private companies. And I think that's certainly something that, over the last 20, 30 years, again, that whole push in the 1970s towards neoliberalism has affected Australia. And I'm not sure how many of our companies have been privatized, but the latest one, of course, is the desire to privatize Medicare, and also Australia Post. And that's one of those the reasons that woman that was
Australia Post,
she was vilified because she was opposed to the privatization of the postal section. So now they're claiming that they can't keep up with things, and that they're under-resourced, and all of these excuses, and so they'll be saying, well, we need to privatize this because private enterprise can do it better than what state-run companies can do.
Yeah, it's an intentional game to devalue that industry enough so that they can just flog it off to the highest bidder.
Yeah.
And the highest bidder has no interest in, whoever buys has no interest in serving the public and having improved service. They're there to do one thing, to make profit. We look at the Melbourne suburban train system. That was privatised under the Kennett era. It's actually run by, I think, Metro Trains, and also the trams as well. There's about 3 companies, but it didn't say that actually improved anything at all. It was there to increase prices. They actually removed the conductors out of there to make more, so they can cut costs to make more profit, and that's all that it primarily for. So the human face value and service we used to receive on the trams is no longer there. Basically, all the maintenance is done by private companies as well, and we've seen this done everywhere, right across, even a lot of our industries that depended, a lot, especially regional areas, but even in city areas that depended on these industries. They grew from our dockyards, our railways, our, you name it, our scientific research, the whole lot. It's all been further and further eroded into private hands. And what I actually found out, it was many years ago, is actually our Australian standards, which is the industry standards. It's all like codes and industry codes, etc. Australian standards, AS, New Zealand standard, X, Y, Z. That's all privatised. You actually have to buy, if you want copy.
We do that all the time at work.
Global Cycle. I forget the name of the company that owns it. I thought, what? They even sold that? But we look at it, the Commonwealth Bank and the old General Insurance Office. That's the regulators of the banking system. Everything else, privatise it. Now look at insurance and banking. It's not there to serve the interests of the people at all. It's there to actually make more money. I mean, they had a banking royal commission. What did it achieve? Yes, it exposed some of the sector of the banking sector, but what's really been done about it? Yeah. So, is privatisation any good? No, it's not. It doesn't serve us. I mean, look, when we're looking at the health sector, there's a lot of health services that we do require, but you'll need private health insurance to obtain it. Now, especially when you get a lot older, and obviously, certain things happens with your back or whatever. There's extra that Medicare cannot cover. Medicare covers the basic health stuff, but when it comes down to a much more advanced health system, it's actually basically formed and privatised. Even what we've done in a government run hospital, back because you'll need private health insurance to cover the costs. I mean, this is just ridiculous.
And I think, the next point where they're talking about the Magna Carta, it was written in 1215, so, a long time ago, but the relevance of the Magna Carta to the Australian democracy is still, still highly relevant. Does anybody know much about the Magna Carta? How it came into being?
I remember studying it in school, but unfortunately I haven't really read much into it since then.
Yeah. Well, my understanding was that it came into being because there was a group of rebellious barons that basically wanted to force King John to sign a negotiated agreement, an agreement that became known as the Magna Carta. And he had to, from memory, he had to concede his supreme governmental power, and so that was this new rising class of barons that no longer wanted to accept the monarchical rule of just one person. And so while we had the history of the Roman Empire, then we sort of had the development of this Magna Carta, trying to wrestle the power of the kings and so on from their domain and put it into the hands of the lesser beings such as the barons and the lords and so on. And so I think he was forced to sign that, although there's been changes to it, and I think he took a bit of his power back, and then it was conceded again and so on. But that was developing still in sort of the 15th century, I think. And then it started to be revived again around the 17th century because of the development of the colonies, and that's where it was kind of brought into Australia and used in the English colonies. So a lot of what we have in Australia in terms of the constitutions and so on is based upon this the Magna Carta, and I think it's interesting the way that let me see if I can find the Peru Libre one. Use the platform of Peru Libre uses the Magna Carta to show that it was probably that it's a reactionary or it's very much a class-based document. So the Article 6, for instance, talks about the state outsourcing or privatising the responsibility for health, education, and security. So that send all of those kind of social responsibilities to the parents and does not assume them as its own responsibility. So it privatizes all of those social things to the parents, and of course the cost then is borne by the parents rather than by society. Prior to the Magna Carta, I imagine that cost was dealt with by the whole of society, if not by the lords and the barons, and they probably thinking this is too expensive for us to be dealing with this. We'll palm it off to the parents, and so we get this kind of development of some freedoms for away from the kings, but then they don't become freedoms for the people at the lower end of the in the lower classes, and I think that shows that the democracy that we live under in Australia is not a democracy for the poor or the workers. It's still a democracy that's based on the Magna Carta that tries to palm responsibility off, social responsibilities off, and business responsibilities off the state and onto the people.
Onto the individual, yeah.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is also the formation of the Magna Carta, or the document, otherwise known, out of that, because remember, keep in mind the king would actually automatically to impose heavy taxes to run a dubious campaign to go, raise an army to go and conquer somewhere to plunder more wealth. Obviously, pay those barons all that, but that's what he did. He imposed a particular tax without any consultation with anyone, because they believed in the divine right rule of the king. It was the godly thing you do. The king said was God. It was basically the word of God, basically, and you dare not question it, or otherwise you would have been horribly tortured and put to death. So basically, when that came about, there had to be some of the barons and lords there, nobles. They had to say, right, enough's enough. We're going to make you then consult with us about, also talking with us about before you make a decision about raising a tax and all that. So it gets interesting. It's an economic development that comes out where these things come out of. Otherwise, if it didn't happen, there would have been no Magna Carta. And what I've known when people in the modern day, when they talk about it, they think about a democratic thing that was great for for basically the common person, basically the serf and peasant, they still didn't have a say even after it. They did not have any representation, and even with the development of the early parliaments in England and Scotland, the peasant people, the serfs, didn't had any representation, or they weren't allowed to vote. They weren't allowed to have a say. They were there to do as what you were told to do, and there to obey and serve not just the king, but anyone that's high above them. Otherwise, they would have been rounded up, and they would have been dealt with quite brutally. And it took a consistent struggle for a few hundred years to even have some form of universal suffrage that we could have a vote. I mean, here in Australia, for example, we did, people like all of us here wouldn't have been able to vote until about up the 1850s, and it was only because of the rebellions on the goldfields here in Victoria and elsewhere, and other protest movements. So I won't say they're protests, but they're proper movements to have some fundamental changes that we could at least have a vote. But even for women, even more so, it wasn't until the end of the 1800s, 1900s, that they could have a vote too. So it was, and for the first people of this country, it wasn't until about the 1960s, after they were recognised as citizens, they have a vote. So it was a consistent thing when they're talking about democratic, being democratic. Well, democratic for whom? For which class of people? And certainly for a long time, for us to even fight for some basic rights in this country. And you're quite right, Luke. It took about 800 years to go from Magna Carta to universal suffrage. It's pretty much, I can pretty much agree to that. The fact is, at the end of the day, they will do everything possible to keep us down. But for us to have a say in everything else for all those years ago, no, it wasn't. It wasn't like the case at all. But we had to actually still consistently struggle for it right up to the very day. And I think actually, one thing as well now, it's been where Parliament is, it's basically, we all know too, where Parliament is, it's basically an instrument of the superstructure of our society. It's not this great bastion of democracy that some people have, but it's actually there to maintain a particular rule of a class, and that is the ruling class be the multinationals, etc. They dictate policy. I mean, and going further, what's interesting, you look at all the policies that's put through by federal governments, state governments, and that. It's not there to challenge the rights. It doesn't challenge multinationals at all. Basically, it's to uphold and maintain further and further profit and increase it. It's not there for the benefit. So when you look at every federal or state budget put through, and you look, we may get a few crumbs on the platter. Okay, we'll throw some money here, and we'll do this, and we'll create some work here, and everyone will be happy. But it's really, at the end of the day, it does not actually challenge the rule of a particular group of people or a system itself.
Yeah.
And I want to have a look again. Sorry, Nate, if you had something to say, but I just wanted to have a look at this Magna Carta because and the points that Peru Libre raised about this, about this document. It's Article 17 guarantees only initial primary and secondary education, but the higher education only guarantees it to those who obtain high academic performance, thus privatizing a fundamental right. And this document was written, let's say, in 1255 or whatever it was, and it has been ratified over the years. So even if we said that Article 17 didn't come until the 18th or 19th century, we're still living under the same premise. That is that we have our primary and secondary education, but it's so undemocratic in that it guarantees that only people that are high academic achievers and those that can afford it, obviously, will get a tertiary education. I just find it fascinating that when we talk about democracy, that we're still living our lives by a document that was written in 1255, and we've not really advanced out of that. And so, how do we consider that what we're living under is a democracy if over the years the same thing is being reinforced constantly in our lives, and we're really not moving on from it?
Yeah, it's a good point you raised, Helen. I think, especially with higher education, I think it's important to just reiterate what you just said. Is that when they talk about privatizing, a fundamental right to education, it's when it was mentions that only those who obtain high academic performance, are guaranteed higher education. I mean, obviously that's just if you can afford the best unis, the best whatever. But it also starts with those students who are even in the public system with parents who may be fortunate enough to be able to afford external tutoring, things like that, which not very many parents can afford. You have parents that are in really dire straits, that are working multiple jobs, that are really struggling to give their children that leg up. So it's definitely not an even playing field. It's not democratic, like you just said. So
yeah, and even for people that send their kids to school, we think that we're told that there's a sense of equality there, that you can achieve, that anybody can achieve. It's an equal system, but we can see right here, it states it in black and white for us that this is what higher education is about. It's about those that can obtain high academic performance, and as you said, Nate, that relates to how much money you have, or unless you're one of those super gifted children sort of thing, and from the working class, they're the ones that go forward. But it's and then of course Article 19 reinforces that whole undemocratic structure by then saying that they're exempt from taxes and that they don't have to pay any money to the state. But yet they make loads of money especially now with privatized, with actual students paying in funds from overseas and so on. So they make loads of money. They don't have to pay any taxes on it, and yet there's no.
They also get government funding.
Massive government funding, as you say, and yet there's no quality checks on their infrastructure, their human resources, or even a guarantee that it's quality education.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is where our basic public education system needs a lot more public money put into it. But you've got something like King's School in Sydney. That's one of the top schools, private schools in the state there. Or got many others there on the North Shore and eastern suburbs of Sydney, and they're basically been given taxpayer-funded subsidies. Get going while the super wealthy can send their children there, or everyone that's on earning $500,000 or more a year can send their sons or daughters to these particular schools. But but at the same time, the public system, especially in what lower socio-economic areas, for example, southwest and western suburbs of Sydney and here in Melbourne, the outer suburbs, northern suburbs, etc. They get left behind. I mean, what the hell? You'd be going, what the F? All right, fine. If some wealthy man wants to send their children to private school, fine, do it. But don't expect us to actually pay for that. You do that, you've made your mind up, but don't expect us to subsidise that at all. They shouldn't be subsidised. I mean, they earn squillions of dollars a year, so they should be able to afford it. And the other thing as well is about denying, actually, when they're saying there's equality before the law or equality before this, no, it's not right at all. I mean, for someone coming from a lower socio-economic background, pardon me, I mean, they could be want to become a doctor. But even if they are able to, they've passed all the entry marks and that to get in university to do so, they've done all that. And then they actually borrow what we call a HEX system over here, and I think it's... correct me if I'm wrong now, Ellen, I don't know, I think up to 20,000 is, or 30,000 to go ahead and pay for that course. In the long term,
that's just one term if you're lucky.
Yeah, they have to pay all that back in their lifetime to pay off that HEX fee, and there's nothing free about it. Even though we definitely need to have doctors, a lot more doctors, and if we can have them homegrown, even better. You think there'd be a lot more investment into that. Instead of trying to take, the requirement is they'd have to go and serve, say, in a regional area for a few years or whatever. But reality is, these people have now got a HEX step over their heads for a very long time, most of their working lives, probably right up to now when they're in retirement, along with trying to pay off a house and trying to meet every other cost of living measures on top of that. So they're basically living for the rest of their life living in debt. So where's the equality of that? Compared to someone like, a very wealthy area, basically had everything put to them in front of them all their lives, never had to fight for or struggle for anything, and they get this, and then that's basically. But the thing is, this document, like Magna Carta, enforces that type of system.
So Article 58 states that private initiative is free, with which we must infer that the public is not, and defines the state only as a body that promotes and guides. How do we understand that?
The state that governs best is a state that governs the least. It's a typical libertarian talking point, eh?
Yeah.
Right. So the suggestion that private enterprise is free and that it shouldn't have to pay taxes, and that therefore to develop public enterprise is not going to be free, and so therefore the state shouldn't play a role in promoting public initiative, and just play a role as a guide and promotes the ideals of the private initiative or private enterprise. Would that be an accurate assessment?
I would agree with that. Yeah.
Basically, so Scott Morrison, our Prime Minister, is going to be the leading light, the guiding light. Oh my God, help us! And I'm under a lot of trouble. Who want to be guided by that twat? But it just basically, you can see it, and this is actually the cornerstone of neoliberal politics, as basically is point out. Now, to them, the state plays a very small role, and we'll leave it up to the free market. The market will dictate, and everyone will be happy after that. Well, we've had 40 years of it. I don't think we're any happier.
And it would be a fine thing if in fact the market could manage itself, but it can't manage. It can't, without government subsidies to bail it out constantly. It doesn't thrive. It can't compete with state enterprise in terms of funding and money, and so it looks for bailouts all the time, and the taxpayer pays for these companies to be bailed out because the governments are so afraid of the economic backlash in terms of jobs and so on, and wealth creation, that they think they have to succumb to the demand for a bailout. But I think their primary objective anyway is to help business and rape taxpayers' money constantly.
Well, we'll see a situation like for example, Peru. Oh, you're quite right. I mean, their material circumstances are different from ours. But for example, last year, remember when all the airlines like Qantas and Virgin had to ground the whole fleet? There was no airline travel because everyone was in lockdown. You couldn't go anywhere, and even still to this day, there's many aircraft still grounded at the moment. Now, it happened to be in Peru now with this new government they've got, and it looks like what they're trying to do, they'd go and nationalise the damn thing. All right, we'll buy it. We're not going to subsidise you. We're buying it. That's it. We're not buying it without compensation. That's it. You've made your squillions out of this. It's back to being back under the public ownership again, and it's going to be there provided as a service and a need for the people, not as a thing to make profit. Where in Australia, Frydenberg, the Treasurer, he came out nearly frothing at the mouth when there was the idea suggested, no, let's buy Qantas, let's buy the Virgin, and there was people were talking about on social media, well, why don't we buy it back? Why don't we actually obtain it, nationalise it? And he said, absolutely no way he'd be wanting to nationalise it all. In fact, he was trying to find another buyer for it. Come on, here it is. We don't feed it off. Well, it can't benefit us. It's got to benefit, the next Richard Branson or someone like that, or Alan Joyce or something like that. But so it's got a benefit and not benefit actually the people. I mean, the last time we actually a fully public entity in the airlines was old Trans-Australian Airlines, TAA, and it was bought by Ansett back in 1990. And that was Bob Hawke and Paul Keating. Like frankly, again, buying there. Yep. Well, we have to start selling off. We can't. No government involvement in that.
Yeah, I just find it hilarious imagining.
And that's
hilarious imagining Josh Frydenberg as Alan Joyce's personal car salesman, used car salesman, flogging off Qantas to the highest bidder.
Yeah. So we should be taking us back. As Luke just said in the commentary there, why buy it when we should just take it back? We should just say, right, well, take it.
Yeah. So Article 59 states that it grants freedom of business, commerce and industry, employment, finance, etc. And Peru Libre goes on to say, well, that's freedom only for the rich. Article 60 recognises the freedom of private and public companies, but restricts the latter unless authorised by express law. In other words, the public company is vetoed. And I think we see that time and time again, really, don't we? We don't really see the development of public companies anymore, unless we're establishing it for business and then we sell it off cheaply to business. Would that be accurate?
Yeah.
Are we developing any? I mean, for instance, if we were looking at developing fusion energy, that could be something that a public corporation could be developed to finance and support that. But you can guarantee once we establish that fusion energy, that we'd probably end up selling it off at half of the price of what it's cost the taxpayers to create.
Yeah.
They won't, and then of course in the public realm, they won't develop things that are beneficial to the people, such as high-speed rail across this vast continent, because it will interfere in the monopoly of road travel and airline travel, and they deem it not profitable. Yeah.
Yeah, it's another example of how that stifles innovation and progress, because you have these industries that are so locked into this model that we've created, and we've designed our cities around certain modalities like car transport and this slow rail that always breaks down and never gets upgraded and all that kind of stuff. And when something revolutionary, truly technologically superior comes around and disrupts everything, these old hands that are making hand over fist profit over it, of course they don't want it. They see it as a threat to their existence.
Yeah, absolutely. Article 61 is the one that fights, but it does not prohibit monopoly. That is, it denatures its own conception of the free market. Thus, we have monopolies of the media, electricity, water, cement, etc. And this is a variant, and that we're definitely seeing that today, aren't we? And Article 62 goes on, it prohibits the review of law contracts, even if they are harmful to the state, claiming security. That's amazing.
And the review of law contracts, what that means is free trade agreements, the ones that get done behind closed doors. No one knows anything about it, and then the two respective major parties just vote on it without even reading one word out of it. They just go, you've got to vote on it, and that's it. And the devil, and this is what we've seen here. So, and there's stuff in our free trade agreements we sign that, if for example, if it's detrimental to the health and well-being of the people, the land, the environment, and if it's challenged in such a way to stop, well, then that multinational company can take the government to court and sue them, even though it's harmful to the land, its population, etc. It goes for anything. So you can have actually a major energy company, like oil and gas, it could be coal, and there's actually a fight to stop them from starting a new coal mine on a particular, especially on fertile land where we grow our food. Well, and if the government steps in, no, you're not going to do that here. Well, that coal mining company can take you to court. And a classic, also another example was with the tobacco industry. And Julia Gillard, I think she might have become Prime Minister by then, or before she was. I won't get into the details about that, but when they actually started plain packaging on cigarettes and all those nasty warning labels. Well, Philip Morris and I think British American Tobacco, and I think it was another player in there as well, actually took the Australian government to somewhere, Royal High Court, I think, like the WTO and stuff. And of course, we all know tobacco smoking is detrimental to human health. I mean, it kills you. It causes cancer or other forms of diseases. So we all know that. But they are trying to actually saying this. They're saying that, well, this hinders our profit. This is hindering our profit margin, and and whatever else, putting obstacles in place. So it just shows you, even though once, for in a very rare circumstance, there is a government that is trying to act in the interests of the common people, be it over tobacco or smoking. But the fact is, you've got the whole tobacco industry taking them to court because they're saying, well, this is going to affect our profit margin. How dare you? You signed this agreement. How dare you? Whack. And when we look at free trade agreements, what's free about them? There's nothing free in it at all. So basically, if we want to try to stop something like fracking on fertile land or new coal expansions or, do anything that's damaging to both the environment and to the detrimental health and well-being of the population, that means basically we're breaking upon the law. You're not allowed to do that. No, we in the government side, we can't do that. We can't do anything about it,
Yeah, it's really what does sovereignty even mean when a private corporation can actually take a state to court and sue them for lost profits? It's ridiculous.
Exactly. And so that's this Magna Carta is, we can see how it is something that is definitely enshrined in the Australian constitutions, both state and federal, and just in our general world democracy and world view. This is how Australia functions in terms of a private enterprise and so on. And so then of course Peru Libre has got together and said, well, what are we going to do about this? And that's where they've started to come up with this idea of a new constitution. And of course, what it starts saying is that we need to promote and achieve a constitutional change that incorporates a diametrically opposite approach. That is the struggle for solidarity, humanistic rescue, and nationalising constitution. And I think that's a great way of looking at how where the possibilities of a new democracy could come from.
Well, what I was going to suggest we do, maybe we can read through chapter 3. It's only it's not that long, 3 and a bit pages, and we can leave it off because we'll finish about 8:30 tonight. It will take a few minutes either way. And obviously go through what they were, basically the cornerstone of what defines the mode of production in their country. So on to chapter 3 here, he goes, new state economic regime. He goes, the economic regime is the cornerstone that defines the mode of production in a country. Currently, we live in an apparently renewed capitalist system, in an economic neoliberalism called the social market economy, imposed since 1993, or in our case since, I think, late 70s, and since then it has gone against the interests of the great majority of the country. To change this sad reality, it is necessary to make adjustments in the economic field, most drastically. New economic model of the state. Our party raises the popular economy with markets, an aspect broadly addressed in the previous chapter. We are not against private companies as long as their activity is translated to the benefit of the majority of Peruvians, nor do we prohibit state business competition. None can have exclusivity or vetoes.
Can I stop you there? And can we have a chat about these as we go along?
Yeah, I can't see why not. Yeah.
So how would we see that in Australia working?
It's a good question. So basically, I mean, look, it's probably good that they stress we are not against private companies as long as their activity is translated to the benefit of the majority of Peruvians. I mean, if you replace Australians there, I would find it very difficult to find any working class Australian person, no matter what their political persuasion, to disagree with it. That's something that we can appeal to the masses with, to say that, well, why shouldn't companies and our economic activity here benefit Australians? And as it goes on to say, nor do we prohibit state business competition. I don't see how anyone could disagree with that either, especially those in the working class. But none can have exclusivity or vetoes. And I mean, that probably speaks to a lot of even those who deem to be pro free market, right? Like if you're pro free market and you're a typical sort of right wing LNP voter or anything like that, how in principle could you disagree with that? That none can have exclusivity or vetoes, because don't you agree with free market, or don't you agree with competition? So I think that's probably a very good way to sort of capture as many people as possible. I think they've done that quite well.
And at this early stage in this constitution, this new economic role, I don't think they're talking at any stage to be looking at nationalising anything in the immediate context. But I think the very fact that they challenged them. So if we went back up to the previous section, it says it will be a wealth redistributing state. So change of the accumulating state that favours the transnational business community by attempting to improve wages by a redistributing state of wealth, favouring the national business community that improves wages. So although they're not talking about nationalising, what they're saying is we're going to ensure that these transnational corporations are going to improve their wages and spread the wealth more to the national business community rather than international multinational corporations. And I think that challenge alone would be enough to force a bit of a showdown with these multinational corporations. And then, of course, as you said, Dave, if they decide to leave or they decide to shut down, then we'll simply take them over. Thank you very much.
Yeah, nationalisation when necessary to protect jobs, you could say.
Yeah, goodbye, exactly. Don't come back either. Actually, I think it'd be interesting with the banking or the finance sector, because that's most of it, pretty much all of it, but most of it is foreign owned. It's owned by the big banks in New York and in London, and even to a certain degree in Tokyo as well, and Europe. But it certainly is. I would predominantly buy New York Stock Exchange and all those like Chase Manhattan, all the others, and Citicorp. The amount of how much ownership they own our four major banks and the others as well. So it would be a challenge. Though it would be certainly a challenge. We put the gauntlet down right. Now, from now on, the whole banking system is to benefit the people, not to benefit you lot anymore. You are now directed to do this, this, and this, and they go, well, how dare you? We're going to go. All right, but we're keeping your assets. See ya. Goodbye. Don't come back. Everything. Goodbye. You're on the first plane out of here. See ya. And also, too, I just want to, before we move on, I want to give a big shout out to a couple of comrades. Dust James is obviously listening at the moment. He's getting ready for work. And also, too, Comrade Pinko, formerly known as Comrade Freaky. He's got his own YouTube channel, so I would highly recommend going over there. He's based here, the First People, lives in Darwin, and you get some quick commentaries on things, and he's fantastic. So a big shout out to him. He deserves our support as well. And also a big shout out to Luke, is one of our big number one followers of our shows here too. So welcome aboard.
Hi everyone.
So I will now go on to the next bit, new economic role of the state. The state must stimulate the creation of wealth as long as it does not arise or lead to exploitation, human trafficking, reduction of labour rights, environmental pollution, tax evasion, violation of fundamental rights, neo-colony situation, corruption, contracts harmful to the state, damage to values and social principles, among others. The socialist left does not renounce wealth, but it must be social, not individual or group. The growth rate, which tries to make us live in a false paradise, is not the best indicator of a mode of production, because it can increase, but at the same time increase poverty thanks to the exploitation of the people and cut their labour benefits in favour of the owners of the means of production. We can sell our resources without leaving anything to the state. We can allow exploitation and it will improve the growth. We can allow exploitation and it will improve the growth rate, but not social welfare. Everyone get that? Yeah. He's
not saying he agrees. They're not saying they agree with that. They're just saying that that's what can happen.
That's this is what's currently happening here. For
exactly.
Example. Where's all our mineral resource, mineral wealth going? All that and all the benefits of that. Are we actually better off? I mean, it's interesting when I'm hearing certain states saying, "Oh, we're powerhousing, we're subsidising." Really, we're not benefiting. It's all that wealth and extraction's been sent to fewer and fewer hands.
Even the way we measure our economies, like GDP is a measure of wealth or prosperity, is exactly like they're saying. It's a false sort of measurement. It paints the country as being a paradise, but really what it doesn't take into account is the disparity of wealth within the country, between the super rich, very few amounts of people owning most of the wealth, and the rest of the people living in dire poverty.
Yeah.
I find this interesting. The very top sentence, it says the state must stimulate the creation of wealth as long as it does not arise or lead to exploitation, human trafficking, etc. So how do we stimulate the creation of wealth without exploitation?
By having a state that owns the
Isn't the creation of wealth created by the exploitation of workers? Or is that a different type of wealth they're talking about?
Yeah, I think, look, as I said, labour creates, or workers, they create wealth. That's it. You've got your natural wealth, but you also, labour creates value. It creates wealth. And that's what it is. What they're talking about, because I like how they said meaning from exploitation, well, basically is we go to work, but basically after the first 2 or 3 hours of work week, we're pretty much working to create extra surplus value, extra profit. We've already covered for our wages for the week. So if you want to look that way, we actually don't get paid the full value of our labour, going back into traditional classic Marxist political economy. But I think what they're meaning here is, unlike here in Australia, when you say government's going to give a stimulus package to, we'll create jobs and do all this, but it doesn't stop all those workers here from having to work long hours, maybe, or on lesser pay. They'd have to do up to 12-hour shifts, 5 days a week, 6 days a week, just to try and make ends meet. We could talk about working shorter hours, but we've still got the 38-hour week. But how can we good talking about the 38-hour week when people are doing 10, 12 hours days? The very simple reason being they're trying to keep ahead of the 8 ball all the time, but in fact they're just wearing themselves down around. So you can look at that way when it says, as long as it does not arise to lead to exploitation. Well, obviously that's one form of it. The other thing as well is come to realise it's as I said, we're not paid for the full value of our labour. And how are we going about that? It certainly is how it can lead to exploitation. And it's not just even at work, but even after work as well. They still take advantage of it, where they give us a bunch of money, but we're paying out, basically robbing Peter to give to Paul. So just briefly wanted to say, I've got a nice wage for the week. But it all has to go to all cost of living measures, and even that further, from rising cost of food, fuel, utilities, insurances, and if you've got a house to pay off, you must pay that off, everything else. So by the end of it, you haven't got nothing to show what's in your, not much to show besides a continual cycle of debt. So for me, I'm happy to be proven wrong, but to me, an exploitation thing is also part of it is keeping us consistently in a state of debt for the rest of our lives. Not just our working lives, but right up to the day we die. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it's interesting the way they've worded that too, because after reading Xi Jinping's book on how the governance of China, it seems very similar to the wording that he uses, where and you can see where China's actually heading with this. Especially recently, where some tough new regulations have come in that sort of lead to this sort of effect, lead to these sort of ends. Not lead to exploitation, human trafficking, reduction of labour rights, all that kind of stuff. And it really asserts the state as the authority in this case, rather than having the corporations rule over the state.
Yeah. And I think this whole question of exploitation is also about who controls the surplus value that's created, and that's whereas under capitalism the surplus value goes to the employer class, the owners of the means of production. They reinvest that to make more money, and they keep reinvesting their money to make more money, whereas the state, stimulating the creation of wealth, would have control of that surplus value that's created, and it could be put back into the economy. It could be put back into the development of more projects, more schools, more hospitals, more teaching, more learning environments, and more sporting environments, more cultural environments, and so on. So I think that could be an aspect of that as well.
Yeah, what there seems to me like they're trying to aim for here is leading to a situation where the state will compel private enterprise to contribute to these social programs and infrastructure projects.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then actually, Dust raised a very good question. If a portion of our wealth is invested in the betterment of society, is that still exploitation? I say no, because if it's benefit for all of us to advance forward, it could be a social housing issue, it could be something else to actually improve our lot. Well, then no, I wouldn't call that exploitation. And I think I sort of had a bit more think about this, but when we're talking about like a job stimulus, or a government here, be it state or federal, talks about stimulating the economy for whatever. But the fact is, it's not there so we can advance us further and better, to move us forward or anything in the betterment of society. It's there so we can just get back out there and start creating more wealth, creating more profit, and that's the fundamental difference. Where in Peru, what Peru Libre was talking about was the fact is, no, we're going to put in a stimulus package or creation of wealth to benefit society, so we can advance and build up their wealth, lift everyone from poverty, where stimulus here hasn't. In fact, we've seen more cases of poverty now than we had 10 years ago or 20 years ago.
And I think that's a great point that's made at the very last sentence of the paragraph, is that it's the socialist left does not renounce wealth, but it must be social, not individual or group. And I think that's a fundamental point as well. Caleb is constantly talking about how we and Marx raised it as well. Of course, he the fact that socialism and communism is based on abundance of wealth. You can't to be rich is glorious, because it will be social and not an individual or group, and that's the difference. So I think that summarizes it beautifully.
All right. Well, just looking at the time, I'll read the next part. It's only a small paragraph. This one, it goes, new economic pluralism. By proposing the popular economy with markets in the contrast to the social market economy, we liberate the state so that it can create a company and compete fairly with private entrepreneurs. The state cannot be oblivious to the benefits of the market in favour of generating well-being for its people. I'll repeat that again. New economic pluralism. By proposing the popular economy with markets in contrast to the social market economy, we liberate the state so that it can create a company and compete fairly with private entrepreneurs. Okay, the state cannot be oblivious to the benefits of the market in favour of generating well-being for its people. It's interesting. Wow.
It is. So if we went back to the school system, we could be saying, well, we already have public schools and private schools, but our public schools will compete fairly with private entrepreneurs. In other words, we won't fund the private entrepreneurs anymore, and we will compete fairly with them on a state basis.
Yeah.
On a government basis, and we can pile all that money that we spend on state schools, which I think, if I remember correctly, I heard once many years ago, and I don't know how true this is, but I certainly think there's an element of truth in it. The figures might not be quite so high, but I did hear that for every state school, the government gives $1 per student to the state schools. In contrast, it gives $10 per student to private schools.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. And we're not aware of that. The Catholic Church benefits greatly from private schools.
Yeah, it's disgusting. I think what's also good about this little paragraph you've read, Dave, is that it not only allows at least a little bit of an opening for the state to start building these support structures for people, but it also allows the possibility in the future for these institutions to expand under the previous mechanisms, whereby they allow themselves the ability, an opportunity to nationalise companies if, by forfeit, for example. So this is a nice little passage that they've got there, which allows them that opportunity.
Yeah.
And I wonder how this can fit in really nicely with the First Nations question as well. So that we liberate the state so that it can create a company and compete fairly with private enterprise. So that would give the opportunity for First Nations people that want to develop a company and develop their own industry and thereby develop their own self-determination, then they can compete fairly with private entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Very good. And and I think actually also as well, it's in a way that the entrepreneurs have to serve the state, that it has to serve the people as well. It's not there just for their own vested interests anymore. It's whilst I'm in a situation, no, you've made your fortune, but the fact is you now must have to serve the people and help them and do your bit to help lift them out of poverty, not by serving the people while you're putting money into a charity or something like that. No, you are now going to be part
of
a properly coordinated rational society and a rational plan. So this is the way I've interpreted that. It's quite interesting, these paragraphs. I think it has everyone thinking now. It's great. This is excellent how it's written out. Well, the next one, it's got new free competition. The state must not only combat private monopoly, but must strictly prohibit it. There should be no room for price coordination, hoarding, and economic speculation. Private companies can compete freely with each other and with the public sector. The exclusivity of the management of some strategic resources can only be reserved for the Peruvian state to safeguard national interests in matters of economy, sovereignty, security, energy, food, and others that merit it. Wow. I think they've actually pretty much outlined it. I mean, it's like no-brainer, especially the last bit when they're talking about their sovereignty, their security, energy, food, and others that merit it. Well, it's an obvious fact that those, especially those sectors, and you probably include health, education there, are not to be mucked around with. As simple as that. They're not there to make profit. They're there actually as part of they could probably fit under sovereignty, but they have to benefit the society. Another one, actually, I'd like to actually point out, what about our water as well? There are countries that have completely privatised their water. Now, without water, as human beings, without water, we're dead. You die of thirst pretty quickly. And that's one of the fundamentals. Some of the fundamentals we need to survive as a species. Now, but the thing is, once it's privatised, it's like saying, well, hang on, you deny my right to have my actual natural human right to actually go for water. I have to pay for it. What the hell?
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of like what happened in Bolivia before Evo Morales took power, is that they were actually giving, I think it was Nestle who they sold their water to.
Yeah.
And there was a situation, it was to the point where if you had water dripping off your roof into a sort of like a bucket or a reservoir or something like that you were charged for it.
And it's another thing. So I think was it Monsanto? They wanted to actually reserve the right to say, for example, if you grew your own vegetables, like tomatoes and stuff, they wanted to have the rights to the seeds. Like, no, we want you to buy our seeds, not you to then sort of reproduce your own tomatoes. That's just using one example, but and regrow it. This is just they claimed they had exclusive right over the seeds. And I think that's just mad. It's downright appalling to think that they've got an actual right to have exclusive copyright or exclusive right over even basic stuff like food. How dare they can tell I should be growing and how I'm growing it, and I'm not allowed to reproduce it, etc.
I've heard of cases where farmers actually get sued by Monsanto where, say they're growing a different type of, say, wheat or corn or something, and they're living, well, sort of their crop is adjacent to another crop that are using the Monsanto GMO sort of patented seeds. If they cross-pollinate, Monsanto then has a case to say, oh, well, this is our intellectual property that you're profiting off, so therefore we have to sue you for damages or sue you for loss of profit.
It's just crazy.
Yeah,
The
it's disgusting.
madness of capitalism, imperialism. Yeah,
Mm.
just
Mm. Interesting sentence here in the passage you just read is that there should be no room for price coordination, hoarding, and economic speculation. I wonder if they intend that to extend into real estate in
good
terms
question.
of landlords and big development corporations buying up tons of units and stuff like that, and
Yeah,
that'll be very interesting to see how that plays out. Because
yeah,
I mean, we know how it is in China. How famously Xi Jinping said that houses are for living in, not for profiting or speculation. So that sort of like ringed a bell in my ear when I heard it.
yeah. Because it's interesting here to look at the price of just like a three bedroom house, especially if it's something run down. It's in the outer suburbs of a capital city, be it Sydney, Melbourne, or wherever. We all know that's supposed to be the cheap, but like what, $500,000? Correct? Anyone feel free to comment. I mean, what's the average of it now? More than $500,000. I mean that was unheard of when I was a kid. If for $500,000 you'd be on a harbourside mansion, in Sydney Harbour, Vaucluse. But no. Not now. It's like let's just say a common three bedroom house. You get the backyard is smaller now, so you all live in closer proximity. It's really energy. It's not energy efficient, etc. So you're paying a lot of it, but they speculate, and a lot of younger generations, but even older people can't afford to buy a house anymore because they've been basically pushed out. Pushed out. Who want to have $500,000 debt hanging over their head? It's not that it's really, full well you're not going to pay that off within 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
All right. Next one, new freedom to contract. This is a little bit more to it than this one, and I think that takes us up to, I don't know. The new freedom to contract. The Peruvian state cannot grant constitutional privileges to transnational capital, losing sovereignty and preventing their revision, even if they are harmful to the Peruvian people. The state can contract, but without privileges or legislative, legal, or tax immunities, such as, unfortunately, the current CPP provides this, such as all the nefarious law contracts that have actually been the freedom for the looting of the Peruvian people must be reviewed.
Yeah. Dave, I think this reads quite badly. We're missing a bit there. So I think that top bit is saying that that's what exists now, and that this is what the current CPP provides for. And then it goes on to say, or they go on to say, what the Peru Libre will do.
Right.
So
okay.
That's what you're up to now.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Yeah, okay. That's how it's worded and printed out. Okay, well, I'll continue on. All the nefarious law contracts that have actually been the freedom for the looting of the Peruvian people must be reviewed. This measure will allow the renegotiation of the proportion of profit sharing, in which the transnational companies keep 70% of the profits and the state only with the miserable 30%. But in other cases, they are awarded up to 80% and 90% of the profits. Profits from the exploitation of our resources at a clear disadvantage of the development of our peoples. We propose to invert the proportion of the distribution of profits, 20% in favour of the transnational and 80% in favour of the state. That's the spirit. Ecuador and Bolivia demonstrated under leftist governance that this is possible and feasible. In Ecuador, the oil contracts established in the 1990s were renegotiated when the price of a barrel was around $16. The state received $4 or $5 per barrel. When oil prices rose, oil companies became multi-millionaire and still continued paying the $4 to $5. With the Citizens' Revolution, contracts for the provision of services were implemented. The oil is from Ecuador. You pay to have it taken out and pay a fixed rate to the oil company based on reasonable profitability, and the rest, no matter the price, go up or down, goes to the Ecuadorian people. This measure quadrupled its annual budget. Thus, it is feasible to eliminate poverty, malnutrition, illiteracy, build roads and airports, achieve comprehensive sanitation with water and sewerage in the most remote villages, and reduce mortality. Mother and child. Well, mother and child. Increase the salaries of teachers, doctors, police, military workers, and sustain social programs. We would be able to pay our internal and external debt in a few years. We would enter industrialisation, and it would improve salaries, achieving a Peru that comes out of underdevelopment. Oh, it's a bit in that one. Sorry, it's just how it's worded. I might have translated and just that's how it came out. But look, I get that, and it's interesting. I was talking to someone a while back about the royalty scheme that is for our iron ore, for example, where it goes to the Western Australian state government. Now, it's a royalty per tonne, or how much. And what they do, they calculate. It's a fixed royalty, fixed sum, and it's calculated out how much it's worth when it comes out of the ground. Not when it's loaded onto processed, loaded onto a train, and sent to the port onto a ship, then sold it to Singapore. I'll use Rio Tinto. I don't care because this is a well-known fact. Rio Tinto then sells it to himself at Singapore, and then on the world scale, sells at a higher price. Well, the royalty is not based on the price of the higher price; it's based on what's calculated that comes out of the ground, and so it's basically a fixed rate per tonne. It hasn't really gone up at all. So the more tonnes that you get, Rio's got to produce 300 million tonnes a year. Well, then that's the only way the state government makes more money out of it, because they get that little bit extra revenue, but the actual price per tonne still been fixed to this day. And that was going back when the first contracts were developed in the 50s and 60s, that the iron ore miners or the mining companies had to actually put investment into the Pilbara and that, build towns and all this and infrastructure, but it was only a limited contract for a period of time. By the 1990s, that's it. It was over. It was all over Red Rover. So, but it's still an outdated system. So we're actually not Australia is not, be it on the state level or on a federal level or Commonwealth level, is not actually getting the full price of what it should be entitled to for anything, be it oil, gas, mineral resources, etc.
Yeah. Yeah, it also inflates prices for those of us domestically consuming those as well as those fuels and products that are sold back to us using those resources and so on and so forth.
Yep.
I think it's brilliant. 80% to the people and 20% to the companies. They pay to take it out of the ground. That's right.
Yeah.
So now we've got there's 1, 2, 3, 4. And 5 paragraphs to go. Did you? I know it's 8:30. Did we want to just hold it off there tonight, or we'll continue on?
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic note to finish on.
Happy to continue. Happy to continue next week. Sorry, next time if you guys are into
continue in a fortnight's time. Well, look, this is giving us something to think about, and those of you watching, look, please hit the like button, please subscribe, please share it far and wide to everybody. This is a great discussion to have to understand where the democracies and how they develop, or what we understand what democracy is, and actually explain what the economic basis. But also, too, I think if we're talking about a higher level of democracy, well, we need to actually have a higher level of economic development to a higher. And obviously, reading through this Peru Libre, it certainly raised some interesting questions and generate some great discussion in a way that Australia can move forward as well. They've said they're totally different economies, or different countries, different language, etc. But the fact is, at the end of the day, there's a lot of similarities as well, and there's a lot we can learn from these other countries as well, where we want to move forward. So, Nate or Helen, did you want to add anything further?
No, I think that's a great way to end off. I think the similarities should be emphasised, so we can. It's good food for thought, I think.
No worries.
I was just going to say the same. Imperialism pushes us all into the same playing field, whether it's on an unequal or an equal basis. But we all are part of that playing field, and our similarities are the things that will unite us, not our differences. So I think that's where this is invaluable.
Yep. Well, it's been a great discussion so far, something completely different. We'll still keep continuing with this document, and we actually, I might have actually put it in the comments section. I don't know if this, I can't really, but it's actually pronounced as Peru Libre, and I think a way basically how I came across the document, I think I Googled it. I think it was there on Google, but obviously for those who are interested, you can actually Google it, download a PDF version of it, and have a good study amongst yourselves as well. Well, look, this comes to the end of our show tonight. It's just past 8:30. want to quiet down. And also, too, big shout out again once again to Dust James as well. We're back on again on Sunday at 10 o'clock. Sunday at 10 o'clock a.m. with Working Class Revolt, Australian Eastern Standard Time. I think that's 8 p.m. US Eastern Time. And that will obviously be having another guest on there as well. So we'll continue on with that, our weekly show with Working Class Revolt, but we will definitely see you all again in 2 weeks' time. And thank you very much. And we'll just hand it off there with a chant that goes, workers of all countries unite.
Workers of all countries unite. Dare to struggle, dare to win.
Dare to win. Thank you, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.